There comes a moment when you're sitting in silence, and not even your own thoughts make sense anymore. It's not sadness, it's not fear, it's not even pain in the way you used to know it. It's something deeper, a tightening in your chest that doesn't go away, a sense that something is happening inside you that you can't explain. You open your mouth to pray, but no words come out. Not because you don't believe, but because you don't even know what to say. And so you sit there, quiet, still. But everything inside you is screaming. People around you think you're just tired, that you need a break, that maybe you're just overthinking. But they don't see the battle. They don't hear the groaning, that soundless ache that presses down on your soul like a storm cloud refusing to rain. It's not depression. It's not confusion. It's a holy weight. And it doesn't go away with sleep or music or distraction, because what's aching in you isn't your mind, it's your spirit. And your spirit is speaking in a language that the world was never meant to understand. This is what Scripture was talking about when it said, "The Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words." You thought you were breaking, but in truth, you were praying, without even knowing it. That soundless cry from the depths of your being. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't giving up. It was your spirit sending signals to heaven that your lips couldn't form. A secret conversation between your pain and the one who reads it like a letter. Have you ever wondered why your tears feel heavier at night? Why you wake up some mornings and feel like you've already run a marathon without moving a muscle? It's because your soul has been laboring in the unseen, wrestling through shadows, fighting for clarity in a fog that won't lift. But what no one sees is that the silence isn't empty. It's sacred. It's full of echoes you don't even know are yours, full of prayers you didn't realize you were offering. The enemy will try to convince you that your silence means abandonment, that God has stopped listening, that maybe you've drifted too far, fallen too short, failed too many times. But what he fears most is the silence you're in right now, because it's not quiet, it's sacred ground. It's the same kind of silence that Jesus entered in the garden when he fell to the ground, sweating blood, and said nothing for hours, just groaned, just wept, just bled. That wasn't weakness. That was divine resistance, the groaning before the resurrection. Sometimes your loudest prayer will be your quietest hour, and in that hour, you're not abandoned. You're being held in a way you don't feel until much later. When all this passes, and you look back and realize that God didn't wait for you to find the words. He stepped into your ache before you knew what it meant. Do you know why your body feels exhausted even when you've done nothing? Because the spiritual realm is more real than the physical, and when your spirit is interceding, it draws everything from you, like a woman in labor who hasn't delivered yet, but knows the contractions are real. That's what your groaning is. It's a contraction. Something is forming. Something is shifting. You're not losing control. You're being prepared. And maybe that's why you've pulled away from people lately. Not because you don't love them, but because you can't explain what's happening in you. How do you tell someone, "I feel like I'm dying inside," but not in a bad way, in a sacred way? How do you say, "I feel like something is ending in me, but I don't know what it is yet"? The truth is, you're not meant to explain it, because what's being written in you right now is between your spirit and God alone. Some processes don't need witnesses. Some sacred things are shaped in silence. Moses didn't hear God's voice in the fire or the storm. He heard it in the stillness. Elijah didn't find direction in the earthquake or the wind. He found it in a whisper. Maybe that's why you've been pulled into a kind of emotional cave. Not because God is hiding from you, but because He's speaking in a tone too deep for noise, too personal for the public. And there, in that heavy quiet, something in you is breaking. But not the kind of breaking that leaves you in pieces, the kind of breaking that softens your shell, so God can reach the parts you've kept protected for too long. The kind that allows Him to come closer than He's ever been. The kind that transforms the sound of your silence into a melody only heaven understands. Your spirit is groaning because it knows something is coming. It doesn't have a name yet. It doesn't have a shape, but it's real, and it's being formed right there, in the ache, in the silence, in the confusion. You thought you were empty, but you're actually full, so full that your spirit can no longer keep still. And it's crying out in the only way it knows how, not through words, but through presence, through surrender, through silence so deep it becomes sacred. Let your spirit groan, let it speak what your mouth can't, because what's coming doesn't require your articulation. It requires your surrender, and that's exactly what you've been doing without realizing it. You've been surrendering by staying, by not giving up, by allowing yourself to feel what you don't understand. That's worship. That's warfare. That's the sound that shakes the heavens, even when the earth hears nothing at all. There's a weight that doesn't show up on any scale. You carry it in your chest, behind your smile, beneath your "I'm fine." It follows you in rooms full of people and still makes you feel alone. It doesn't speak, but it shouts. Not loud, but constant. And you've tried to name it before: stress, exhaustion, burnout, but deep down, you know it's something else, something sacred, something ancient. It's your soul calling out for something it remembers but can't yet see. That ache, it's not random, it's not meaningless. You were made for something bigger, and your spirit knows it. That's why the shallow things don't satisfy anymore. That's why the people who once filled you now drain you. It's not that they change, it's that you're evolving. There's a restlessness in you because your destiny is waking up. And that waking doesn't always feel like light. It often starts in shadows. Think of a seed buried underground. It's dark, it's silent, and if you didn't know better, you'd think it was dead. But deep in that darkness, something is cracking, something is stirring. It doesn't look like growth, but it is. The outer shell breaks so that life can begin. You are in that process. And the groaning in your spirit, that's the cracking. The holy pressure of heaven pushing life through your soul's soil. You might feel like you're drowning in emotions you can't name, or that your thoughts keep looping back to the same unanswerable question. You replay conversation, regret moments, question decision, and all the while you ask, why now? Why this? But what if the questions themselves are the invitation? What if God isn't trying to give you answers? He's trying to bring you into a new level of awareness. What if the groaning isn't a problem, but a pregnancy? Pain doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it means preparation. When a woman goes into labor, she doesn't always understand what her body is doing, but it doesn't matter. The body knows. It was designed to respond when the time is right. Your spirit is no different. When the appointed time draws near, the groaning begins, not because you've done something wrong, but because something right is on the horizon, and heaven is alerting your spirit before your eyes can see it. This is why you can't explain your emotions to others anymore, why the advice that used to help now feels empty, why no one's words seem to land, because you're in a place beyond language, beyond logic. You're walking through the wilderness of the soul, and no map can guide you, only presence, only trust. And this is where faith becomes something deeper than belief. It becomes breath, a knowing without knowing, a resting in the groaning. You may feel like you're behind, like everyone else has moved forward while you're stuck. But pause for a moment. What if they're rushing into places not meant for them, and you're being held back for something that requires precision? God doesn't waste time. He redeems it. If He's delaying your movement, it's because He's orchestrating something you're not ready to carry yet. And that groan you feel? It's your spirit aligning with timing you can't see, but will soon walk into. There's something holy about being undone, about having nothing left to give, and realizing you were never meant to carry it all in the first place. When you reach that point, when the words fail and the tears come for no reason, that's often when God is closest. Not loud, not forceful, but present. And His presence doesn't always fix the situation. Sometimes it just fills the space where you thought you were alone. You're not weak for feeling this. You're not lost. because you're silent. You are responding to a spiritual reality that your logical mind was never meant to process. The spirit inside you is active, interceding, whispering things to heaven that your mind would never have dared to say out loud. And God, in His mercy, is listening. Not just listening, interpreting, translating your groans into strategy, into provision, into peace. Do you remember how Jesus groaned at the tomb of Lazarus? How He wept, not just for His friend, but for all of humanity's ache, for every soul that had ever felt this same weight. He wasn't just reacting to death. He was responding to the collective groan of a broken world. And in that moment, heaven heard it. Heaven still hears it. Every tear you've cried in secret, every sigh you've released in the dark, every moment you almost gave up but didn't, those weren't wasted. They were recorded. They were echoed. They were honored. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. And that space being carved out by the ache will one day be filled with glory you never expected. So don't rush this groaning. Don't silence it or shame it. Let it work in you what it came to do. Let it strip away the surface. Let it take you deeper. Because where you're headed, surface faith won't sustain you. You need a root system that can survive drought. A spirit that knows how to speak without speaking. And that's exactly what this season is teaching you. You are not being left behind. You are being drawn inward, into the stillness where all divine things are born, into the place where words cease and knowing begins, into the silence where the Spirit prays on your behalf and heaven moves in ways you can't yet see, into the very heart of God. Sometimes the deepest groans come not from what has happened, but from what hasn't, from the doors that never opened, the phone calls that never came, the prayers that still have no visible answer. There's a silence that doesn't scream, but stings, and in that silence, you begin to wonder if God still hears you at all, if your words evaporate before they reach heaven, if your heart is pounding against a wall that doesn't move. But what if the wall isn't a rejection, but a redirection? What if the silence isn't absent, but saturation, where God is filling every invisible place with the answer you don't yet have language for? We assume that God moves in volume, in lightning and thunder, but sometimes He moves in stillness, in delay, in groans, in spaces so empty that they become sacred. You weren't created to live constantly filled. You were created to be shaped by emptiness too, by longing, by holy hunger. And there's a kind of hunger that only comes when the Spirit begins to recognize the weight of its calling. You ache not just for relief, but for purpose. You don't want just answers anymore. You want alignment. You want to feel that your pain has meaning, that your tears didn't die on your pillow, but planted something eternal. That's where the Spirit steps in, not with explanations, but with intercession. When Romans 8:26 says that the Spirit intercedes with groanings too deep for words, it's describing a level of intimacy we rarely talk about. This isn't prayer as performance. It's not eloquence or theology. It's the raw, soul-level groaning that bypasses intellect and goes straight to the throne of God. It's a spiritual language only heaven understands. Have you ever sat in complete silence and suddenly felt overwhelmed by emotion with no clear reason? That's your spirit speaking. That's the groan. It's when the soul leaks, when the heart can't hold in what the mouth can't say. And it happens to those who are being pulled into deeper waters, into places where words won't carry you, only surrender will. There's a man I once knew who prayed every day for healing, not for himself, but for his son. Years passed, treatments came and went, hope rose and collapsed again. And in the middle of one silent, exhausted night, that man fell to his knees with no words left, just tears, just groaning, just the kind of sound that doesn't come from the mouth, but from the marrow. And it was in that moment, not when he was strong, but when he was completely broken, that he finally felt peace. Not because the situation changed, but because something within him did. He stopped trying to fight for control and allowed the Spirit to speak for him. This is the paradox of spiritual maturity. It often looks like emotional unraveling, like weakness, like not knowing what to do. But it's in that very place that God rewrites the script. He doesn't need your strength to move. He just needs your surrender. And surrender often begins with a groan. What's more powerful than the groan itself is what it produces. The word in Greek used in Romans 8 for groaning is stenagmos, a deep inner sigh. It's the same word used for the groaning of creation, meaning your pain is not isolated. All of creation is groaning. The earth, the heavens, the souls of men. It's all one giant longing for restoration. Your spirit's groan is part of a cosmic choir calling heaven to earth. And God, being the composer of it all, hears every note. He doesn't need you to articulate what you need. He already knows. But when your groaning aligns with the Spirit's intercession, heaven begins to arrange what earth cannot. Angels are dispatched. Timing is recalibrated. Strength is renewed. Not because you shouted the right words, but because you trusted Him enough to stop pretending you had them. Let that sink in. The Spirit knows you better than you know yourself. It knows your future, your hidden fears, your unspoken dream. It prays with insight you don't have, and it does so not from above, but from within, from that sacred place where God planted eternity in you before you were even born. This groaning, then, is not just emotional, it's prophetic. It's your spirit bearing witness that something is shifting, that the delay isn't denial, it's divine choreography, that the pain you're in now is echoing through the corridors of heaven and moving things on your behalf. If you've felt heavy lately, if you've had moments where all you could do was sigh, breathe deeply, or sit in silence without understanding why, don't rush past it. Sit with it. That's the sacred space where the Spirit is doing its deepest work. Not always visible, not always logical, but always purposeful. You don't need to impress God with eloquence. He's already moved by your vulnerability. You don't need to explain everything to Him. He already knows what your silence means. And He answers not just words, but groans. That's how intimate He is. That's how attentive. He hears what even you cannot say. So let the groan do its work. Let the sighs speak when your words fall short. You are not weak for feeling this. You are not distant for being quiet. You are standing on holy ground, and the ache you feel is proof that God is near. You don't have to know the way forward. You just have to trust the one who's praying for you when you don't know how to pray for yourself. And somehow, in the quietest moment, when your soul runs out of strength, you will feel it. Not the answer, but the assurance. Not the solution, but the presence. And that presence will carry you where your feet cannot. There's something haunting about the space between your groan and God's answer. That quiet middle, that waiting room of the soul, is where most people lose faith. It's not the suffering that breaks them. It's the silence that follows. The silence after the prayer. The silence after the tears. The silence that seems to mock your devotion with stillness. But silence is not absent, and delay is not denial. What if, instead of fighting it, you began to listen for what the silence contains? Because the truth is, silence is not empty. It's full of hidden movements. It's full of the Spirit working in dimensions your logic can't penetrate. It's full of God rearranging circumstances, aligning people, shaping your character for what you're being called to carry. You see, we're taught to treat groaning like weakness. Society applauds confidence, composure, and polished words. But in the kingdom of God, it's the groan that carries the greatest power. That wordless ache, that trembling breath that leaves your chest like a prayer without shape. Heaven listens to that. Angels move at the sound of that. Because it is not a cry of despair, it is a cry of surrender. And surrender always shakes the spiritual realm. The most transformative moments of your faith won't come when you're standing tall. They'll come when you're laid bare, when you've tried everything, said everything, prayed everything, and you still feel like nothing is changing. That's when the Spirit intercedes, with a language that bypasses every human system. That's when the spiritual dimension bends toward you. God doesn't measure your faith by the number of words you speak, but by the depth of your groaning. It is there, in that silent spiritual language, that your truest self is revealed. The self that doesn't perform. The self that doesn't try to impress God, but simply collapses into His arms. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Son of God, knowing what awaited Him, fell to His knees and groaned. Not once, but 3 times. He didn't preach. He didn't deliver a theological monologue. He groaned. He sweat blood. He cried out, "If it is possible, take this cup from me." But then, "Not my will, but yours be done." That was not weakness. That was the full surrender of a son to his Father. And it's in that groaning that redemption was born. Your groaning is not the end of your strength. It's the beginning of divine exchange. It's the moment your limitations meet God's infinity. And it's the place where the Spirit begins to mold you into something you could never become through words alone. Sometimes, the most powerful prayers are the ones you never speak. The ones where all you can do is sit in a dark room and breathe. The ones where your spirit says more in silence than your mouth ever could in sound. And in those moments, something begins to shift. Not necessarily outside of you, but within you. Your soul begins to stretch. Your heart becomes softer. Your discernment sharpens. Because the silence teaches you how to hear differently. It breaks you open to a deeper level of sensitivity. You begin to feel things before they happen. You become aware of people's pain before they speak. You learn to walk by sensing, not just by seeing. And this is not mystical fluff. It's spiritual depth. It's what happens when your intimacy with God moves beyond religion and into communion. You become attuned to heaven's frequency, and your life begins to flow with that rhythm. The world teaches you to move fast, to fill every silence, to always have a plan. But the Spirit teaches you to slow down, to wait, to groan if you must. Because groaning means you're no longer trying to control the outcome. You're trusting the one who knows the end from the beginning. That trust transforms everything. It turns your fear into anticipation, your uncertainty into worship, your silence into sacred space. And eventually, it turns your groan into strength. I want you to imagine this. A woman sits at her kitchen table late at night. Bills are piled on one side. Her phone hasn't rung in weeks. Her prayers feel like echoes. Her spirit is too tired to form words, and so she just sits there, eyes closed, hands open, chest rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths. That's all. Just breath, just presence, just a deep ache she can't name. But what she doesn't see is what's happening in the unseen. The Spirit is groaning with her, not watching her from afar, but sitting beside her in that kitchen, groaning too, interceding, interpreting her pain into a petition, wrapping her in the presence of God when all she feels is abandonment. And in that groaning, she is being rebuilt. That's how God works, quietly, invisibly, deeply. And if that's where you are, if you've run out of prayers and all you have is breath, then know this: you are not losing. You are not failing. You are being refined. You are being invited into a level of spiritual communion that only a few ever experience. Not because you're special, but because you're surrendered. Because you stopped trying to impress God and started letting Him carry you. Your groaning is not the end of your story. It's the language of your rebirth. And when you let the Spirit take over, He doesn't just fix what's broken. He transforms it. He takes your groans and turns them into seeds. Seeds that grow in dark places. Seeds that break open under pressure. Seeds that one day rise and bear fruit, not only for you, but for others who will need your story. So let the silence teach you. Let the ache shape you. Let the Spirit groan through you. And without realizing it, one day you'll wake up and realize you're not groaning anymore. You're breathing deeply. You're standing taller. You're walking lighter. Not because life got easier, but because your spirit got stronger. Because the intercession of the Spirit carried you through what you thought would break you. You're not who you were, and you're not where you'll end up. But right now, you are in the sacred middle, the groaning ground, and that's the most powerful place to be.